Hello, fellow Starfinders. My name is Baylor Corva, and I'm an exoanthropologist with the Starfinder Society. This datalog contains information on the packed world known as Aucturn. Well, maybe planet isn't the most accurate description, but it's the best one my fellow researchers and I can come up with. As you'll soon see, Aucturn doesn't really play by the rest of the rules as the rest of reality. However, for simplicity's sake, I will refer to it as a planet. Aucturn is the most distant planet in the Golarion system, with it taking 500 standard years for it to revolve around the sun. However, this is one of the few stable things about Aucturn. This is because for some unknown reason the diameter, rotational speed, and environment can randomly and drastically change. And to add to the confusion, trying to get readings from the planet or even remotely viewing it often gives inaccurate results from the conditions on the planet itself. For example, a ship may use its long-range scanners on Aucturn and see that it's a gas giant, but if they were to communicate with someone on the surface on real time, they would report that they are watching the sunset behind some mountains that appear to be made out of teeth. However, if that ship were to go into orbit, they would clearly be able to see the fleshy surface of Aucturn, and its many inky black oceans, and its yellowish, hallucinogenic, toxic atmosphere. The prevailing theory for why this is that Aucturn is not a planet at all, but a giant cosmic womb for an unborn great old one. What will happen will vary from cult to cult, but suffice to say, it's not going to go well for anybody who's not a fan of wearing a specific set of robes and reading madness-inducing books. And as much as I want to dismiss these claims, I can't deny that the way the planet's size changes does look like breathing if you speed it up. And the one time I went to Aucturn, I put my ear on the ground and I swore I heard a heartbeat. Also, as a general rule of thumb, if a cult is being open about their beliefs, they'll usually tell you the truth as far as they are aware. And coupled with the fact that I've gotten the same response from cults who will usually shoot each other on sight, it doesn't seem like they're lying. Also, despite the fact that Aucturn is a giant unborn cosmic baby, it does actually have native creatures. And while most natives are the kind of mindless, unknown horrors that can be found in an H.P. Lovecraft book, there is a native race known as the Orgonization who are actually sentient. Like I said, the Orgonization are the most intelligent natives of Aucturn, at least as far as can be understood. For all we know, Gugs could be hyper-intelligent beings and we mere mortals are just too dumb to understand them. But from my research, the most I've seen them do is some simple tool usage. And that mostly consisted of them beating one of my fellow researchers to death with the body of another researcher. Anywho, getting back on track, while the Orgonization are technically the most intelligent natives of Aucturn, they mostly spend their time using their proboscis to drink from the planet's many ichor springs and pools, which not only feeds them, but also gets them extremely high, and results in them laying around or passing out in a narcotic-like haze. However, unlike your typical stoner, drinking the planet's ichor puts the Orgonization in a dreamlike state called the womb mind. While in this state, they believe they can actually communicate with the gestating elder god of Aucturn. And while this sounds like a flimsy excuse to get high, testing has shown that while the ichor is in their system, Orgonization have the ability to give vague but accurate predictions of the future. But when sober, Orgonization have the mental capacities of your typical stoner. However, there are some Orgonization who not only function while drinking Aucturian lean, but seem to function better under its influence. These Orgonization are called ichor lords. And besides the typical delusions and abuses of power that anyone with a management position on Aucturn engages in, they all also share in the belief that Karsi the King is the greatest of the ichor lords and refer to him as the first dreamer. Say what you will about Aucturn, but it is the most geographically diverse planet in the material realm. You can go from an area being a mountain range made up of fleshy material with trees made of bones, to an ichor-filled swamp. Typically these changes happen over a period of months, but it's not completely unheard of to have these changes happen overnight. Despite this chaos, there are locations that have remained the same for as far back as the Gap, if not even longer. The following locations are points of major political importance on Aucturn or otherwise notable locations. Because if I were to list every location on Aucturn where something weird was happening, I'd basically be reading the Aucturian phone book to you, which, oddly enough, Aucturn still has. One of the largest cities on Aucturn, Amniek is a somewhat circular-shaped city at the base of the Gravid Mound. This is done so the City Council, better known as the Midwives, can better watch over and care for the unborn god of Aucturn. The Midwives are a group of extremely powerful spellcasters, and despite what you may think, they don't discriminate based on gender, even though traditionally they have all been female. Currently, there are 3 men and 2 mysterious rag-covered siblings in the midwives. For the average citizen, life on Amniek is as normal as you can get on Aucturn. The biggest difference is the fact that each citizen spends several hours each day chanting praise, begging for mercy, and confessing sins to both the Gravid Mound and the midwives. While nobody is forced into doing so, it is highly encouraged because, as one of the residents told me,
"Think of it this way, if it hatches tomorrow, you will have at least a day's worth of prostration over the rest of the galaxy, at the cost of missing out on whatever extranet show you're going to binge watch. And if you're worried about not getting stuff done, I have some Oregon Rush that I can share with you."
The Gravid Mound is a giant tumor-shaped object the size of your typical mountain range. On top of the mountain is an open caldera, but instead of being full of magma, it's filled with boiling, chunky amniotic fluid. God, that is a sentence I never want to have to say again. This place is believed by many to be the spot on Aucturn where the unborn god will emerge from. Because of this, the midwives can usually be found here checking on the fluids and doing what they can to ease the god's birth, and basically suck up to it, in the hopes that when it is finally born, they will be there and they will become its high priests and possibly be taken to the next level. While the Citadel is the largest and most populated settlement on Aucturn, it is technically just one big building, the base of which is several acres wide and reaches about a mile into the sky. However, unlike most superstructures, the Citadel is made up of dense oily black stone, iron slabs, flesh bricks, and bone. But as far as I can tell, there's no rhyme or reason for why these construction materials were chosen, or even a pattern. Honestly, in some parts it looks like some of the materials were just thrown together at random, like a lazy child's macaroni art. But hey, that's Aucturn for you. Despite its size and population, the inside always seems like it's way more deserted than it should be. And while I didn't get any accurate measurements, I swear that place is bigger on the inside. Most of the time, the Citadel feels like you're in a giant abandoned eldritch warehouse. And if you're lucky, you might encounter a handful of cultists each day. However, this quickly changes whenever Karsi the King, immortal high priest of Nyarlathotep, avatar of the empty traveler, praise be his name, decides to make an appearance. Off-world, I can just say Karsi the King, but when you're in the Citadel, you better say the whole thing, or else you'll probably get a visit from the High Stalkers. The High Stalkers are a group of individuals who make sure that the laws of the Citadel are carried out with extreme prejudice. However, getting back to Karsi, whenever he makes an appearance, the Citadel becomes one giant celebration, where almost every inhabitant comes out to adore and honor him. The crowd becomes worked up to the point where ecstatic suicide is not an uncommon occurrence. I'll tell you, it's a hell of a thing to see someone in a bloodstained robe rail a whole sandwich bag full of rapture dust, scream,
"Oh, great gods, I'm seeing dead things!"
and then pull out a disintegration pistol and then disintegrate themselves. But besides cult suicide and isolation, they actually do have some very interesting libraries, and if you have the opportunity, I would highly recommend visiting the Weeping Cathedral or the Repository of Errant Lore. However, I also recommend that you avoid visiting the flesh farms. Granted, it is where all the cathedral's food comes from, but yeah, nothing good ever comes from visiting a flesh farm in the basement. The Pyramid of the Black Pharaoh sits directly across the undulating sea from the Citadel of the Black. From the outside, the pyramid is made of your typical black, oily, eldritch stone that defies all attempts of analysis, and is the main place of worship for the elder god Nyarlathotep. Unlike most temples where you listen to someone on that god's top 8 friend list tell you about how cool that god is and how they want to be worshipped, Nyarlathotep expects you to group up with other worshippers and teach each other, and to figure out on your own if that transcendence potion you were taught to make really will let you commune with them, or just poison you. Besides the main cathedral chamber, the interior branches off into a bunch of secret passages and rooms, some of which seem to move around. However, some of the devoted have come out of these back rooms and returned with unknown magical knowledge, highly illegal and/or lost technology, or some forbidden secret knowledge. However, most cultists who have done this are very hush-hush about it, and at most will show off their treasure briefly before throwing sand in your eyes and running away. One weird thing is that even though Karsi the King is the high priest and possible avatar of Nyarlathotep, he has never been seen at the pyramid. Righteousness is one of the few places on Aucturn that is not dominated by mind-bending evil eldritch horrors. Instead, it is populated by a different kind of eldritch horror: angels. Righteousness consists of a handful of connected domed structures covered in extremely bright light that have magically calming effects on the viewer. Besides its calming effect, it also keeps the corrupting nature of Aucturn at bay. While most outsiders are turned away, the few who have been deemed worthy and allowed in have reported that it looks like you would expect somewhere that angels would hang out. It has radiant light, golden marble columns, and that the angels spend their time singing in angelic choirs or training and preparing to fight in a future crusade against evil, and that righteousness is to be the beachhead from which they will launch the fight. However, one thing that everyone says is that the angels are all extremely fatalistic and all expect to die in the upcoming conflict, and refuse to share any further information on the subject. From a distance, Saltlash looks like a picturesque pre-industrial fishing village from one of those underdeveloped planets that apparently results in you getting a fine just because you were bored and gave Tommy guns and zoot suits to the natives. However, once you get closer, you are reminded of the fact that you are still on Aucturn. Once you arrive, you'll quickly notice that every resident is a horribly inbred human, and they all seem to worship some unknown aquatic cosmic horror from under the undulating sea. You will also notice that each inhabitant is immune to Aucturn's toxic drug-fueled air, because of the fact that they can freely move around without the aid of an environmental suit or some other kind of air filtration system. Once a year, the residents all participate in a ceremony called the Festival of Tithing. The high point of the festival is when the tithe, which is typically a child of Saltlash, steps forward towards the dock, and a giant tentacle bursts from the depths and drags the child down, but not before smearing its eldritch goo onto the salt deposits on the cliffs. The affected salt can then be turned into a potent narcotic, which the residents then process and sell. For whatever reason, the sale of these drugs is only ever enough to keep them living in poverty. From what I can tell, the festival is basically a ritual where the residents have to pretend to be happy, but they do so with the joy of a waiter who is just about to clock out, and were then told that they are needed to sing the happy birthday song. When asked why they don't just leave, they all say, "What? And leave all of this?" in the exact same monotone voice. In regards to its confirmable history, not much is known about Aucturn. Most knowledge about its history has been either lost to the gap, or has become closely guarded eldritch lore. From what we know, most of Aucturn's history has consisted of minor conflicts between the Dominion of the Black and the other various cultists who worship the Elder Gods. However, sometime during the gap, the fighting between the Dominion and the other cultists cranked up, and the various cultists were able to mostly push the Dominion off of Aucturn and into the small concentrations that you can find them in today. Because of its chaotic nature, Aucturn doesn't really have that many united groups. Most factions consist of the cult compound, settlement, or rare city that an individual lives in. The closest thing that Aucturn has to a leader is Karsi the King, and in reality this is mostly because he is the most sane and level-headed leader on Aucturn that the Packed Worlds could find and contact consistently, and from what I've read, this is mostly due to his PR team. However, besides the native inhabitants and the Elder God cultists that we have already talked about, the most prominent group on Aucturn would be the Dominion of the Black. From what I've found, the Dominion is similar to other groups that worship the Elder Gods, but the things they worship are even more esoteric and mysterious, and have names like
Infinity ceases now. The five who speak as one.
or
The whispers of the void have eyes.
basically, they're just hipsters of the occult world.
Oh, what's that you have there? The Necronomicon? I used to read that, but it's too mainstream now. I only listen to the voices that come from she who beckons from the midnight sun and suns.
Politically, Aucturn tends to keep to itself. This is partially because of how far away Aucturn is from the rest of the Packed Worlds, and because of how most of its residents tend not to trust Offworlders, and partially because of how the rest of the Packed Worlds would rather not engage with Aucturn. Because of this, Aucturn does not have a representative on the Packed World Council, and while having less legal rights than some moons, it still does have representation to speak on its behalf. This is done by Karsi the King, who is the de facto ruler and face of Aucturn. However, I think we really know who's in charge.